Hey everyone, this is Joshua Kirk here with you once again, and now it's time, finally, for episode 191 of Album of the Day, in which, before I get into today's review, I just want to apologize for not coming out with a review last weekend. I was just suffering from a cold, and I had a variety of different symptoms, including, like, stuffy nose, and sore throat, and coughing a lot and stuff like that. And as you can hear by my voice, I still have a little bit of a cold, but I'm definitely feeling much better than I was this past weekend. So I'm finally ready to do this album review, which is for the latest album from an indie folk singer-songwriter who started out in his career in the indie rock band The Microphones, his name is Phil Elverum, but his current project that he's been making music under for the past few years or so is called Mount Eerie, and he's definitely a very productive figure when it comes to underground indie folk music, and definitely could be compared to other such artists such as old Sufjan Stevens and as well as old school Bright Eyes Conor Oberst material. And now I'm here to review his latest album, which came out last year on March 24th, 2017. And the album is called A Crow Looked at Me. And as you can see, I have it on the CD copy here, which this is actually a CD print put together by a Japanese independent label by the name of 7EP, because I wanted the vinyl. I asked for it on vinyl for Christmas, but for some reason the vinyl isn't really available anymore. The vinyl I must have found of this album must have been just a limited edition thing, so unfortunately I don't have it on vinyl. No, but anyway, I'm definitely cool with the CD because this is a great record, and I put it as number 14 on my top 50 albums of 2017. But as I listen to this album more, I'd have to say that I'd have to put this in my top 10 of the year actually. Anyway, this is the album cover, really nice album cover. Then there's the back. There's 11 songs on the album. It's over 41 minutes long, so not an overly long album. And that's actually a picture of him with his daughter. How sweet. And here's some really cool artwork in the inside. Excuse me. There's a little prologue at the beginning. And then here are the lyrics, which, because this is on a Japanese independent label, it also features the lyrics in Japanese too, which is pretty cool. And in the US, this album is on a label called P.W. Elverum and Son, which is is Phil Elverum's own independent label. There's the disc. So that's the packaging for Mount Eerie's A Crow Looked at Me, the CD. Now, this is an album that's definitely a bit of a concept album, but, a rather kind of tragic concept album, as this is an album sort of addressing kind of a bit of a big tragedy in Phil Elverum's life, which is the death of his wife, who was the cartoonist and musician, Geneviève Castre, I think is how you pronounce her last name. It's very French. So this is the kind of record where, I don't recommend listening to this if you want to throw a party or something like that. I highly recommend you listen to this album sort of in some introspective moments, preferably in solitude, because it is definitely a very heartbreaking, depressing record if you really think about the lyrics. But at the same time, it definitely is a very cathartic, beautiful record, and also I think it's definitely a good, it must be some huge relief for him to sort of not try to hide these emotions and really kind of let it all out and create this amazing album out of them. The opening track on here, Real Death, opens with the line, "Death is real," which may as well be the title of the record, as Phil Elverum himself says in the liner notes, because, death is definitely a very, hard, tragic thing that we all have to deal with, and it's sad, and it's, kind of frustrating as it may be, it is real, and you can't really do anything about it. And I love how on this track, he really kind of stares it right in the face, like even though it's not him who's dying, but rather a loved one in his life who has to see him just kind of stare his emotions right in the face on this track is definitely amazing. And then towards at the end of the song, he kind of goes into this more kind of elongated poem piece where he sort of addresses kind of the actual sort of feelings and thoughts he was having on the day that she died. In fact, this album is actually recorded in the same room in which his wife died, using mostly her instruments and writing all the songs on her paper, really paying tribute to her in a pretty kind of ambitious way. And you pretty much see right off the bat with this track, this is going to be a very stripped back record musically. There is some there's some soft, melancholy guitars, brooding bass, a kind of sparse drum machine in the background, beautiful piano, as well as the usage of this kind of harrowing, but at the same time, kind of hopeful accordion, which apparently the accordion used on this track is like her old family accordion. So this track is really one example of him really sort of paying tribute to her and kind of coming into this phase of having to deal with the fact that she's not around anymore. One track on the record that I think that really stood out to me and really sort of defines the whole theme of the record would have to be the song Ravens, which is the longest song on the record, almost 7 minutes, so it's kind of a patience testing one. You really got to pay attention to the lyrics on this one, though. It's just so painful and at the same time very poetic and just beautiful. And he sort of talks about how sort of prior to her death, just as she was dealing with her pancreatic cancer, he goes out into the yard or to do his normal sort of chores around the house, and then eventually he finds these 2 ravens outside and sort of how their black feathers tinted in the sunset and sort of knowing that these birds are sort of omens, but not really what for, but then sort of realize that they were kind of omens for the fact that she was gonna die, which eventually leads him to sort of talk about her death a little more vividly in the song. It's definitely, it must be very painful for him to sort of spat out lyrics where it's like, what was you is now burnt bones, and I cannot be at home. It's sort of talking about giving her clothes away, doing all this stuff, but then also talking about a trip to Heidi Guai that he took with just him and their 1.5-year-old daughter. Year old daughter, as well as talking about sort of putting her ashes in a jar and sort of releasing them to the sea. And he sort of gets reminded of all these memories through very simple things, including sand still in the blanket when they released her ashes from the jar. And it's a jar, and it's definitely pretty heartbreaking to hear him say at the end, but here is where I came to grieve, to dive into it with you, with your absence, but I keep picking you berries. And then after that is the song Forest Fire, which features a kind of melancholy, gorgeous guitar riff that that definitely reminds me a little bit of a riff that could have come off of the Bright Eyes record Fevers and Mirrors, even though I would say I don't really like Bright Eyes or Conor Oberst that much anymore, even though you may remember if you've watched my channel for a long time, I really loved his work and whatnot, but this Mount Eerie record that's sort of inspired by some of that stuff actually is, really good. Really good. Anyway, back to the song Forest Fire, which features sort of addresses like this actual forest fire that has happened in Phil Elverum's hometown. It's sort of talking about how he's been doing things like closing the windows and doors, even though it was painful for him. So he kept them open for as long as he could. But then eventually the baby gets cold, and he just watches the calendar bulldoze, and then he sort of climaxes to the story of a forest fire that sort of grows on the edge of town where they used to swim. And sort of looking at the fire and sort of thinking that the world was actually constantly ending, which it kind of makes sense he'd say that, not only because his wife died, but because we are living in some very tumultuous times right now. With times, and it's definitely a very tragic little vignette that sort of I like how he sort of creates all these little vignettes to sort of tie in with dealing with his wife's death. Because they create some sort of symbol of death and all this stuff. So I definitely do applaud him for really kind of taking the time to really kind of confront dealing with death in this sort of way. The song Swims is a track that sort of talks about how, it's hard for him to sort of let her go, even though that's kind of what he has to do sometimes in order to not feel so down all the time. And I really like how he brings up some stuff that their counselor said, like, your transformed, dying face will recede with time, time, but then it sort of adds to the tragedy by sort of talking about how 2 months after Genevieve died, their counselor died too. Died all at once, her empty office with no light on, as if her work was done. Done. We were always so close to not existing at all, except in the confusion of our survived bys, grasping at the echoes. Today her daughter asked me if Mama swims. I told her yes she does, and that's probably all she does now. What was you is now born across waves, evaporating. Those are quite some intense last lines right there, Mr. Elverum. And then after this, we get into some shorter tracks, including the song My Chasm, which still manages to leave a pretty big impression, even at its short running time. Runtime. It's sort of talking about how what sort of initially was this kind of normal sort of things that he did every day. It sort of turned into just kind of him kind of falling into sort of a companion of like confusion and pity. Hence the line, I now wield the power to transform a grocery store aisle into a canyon of pity and confusion, and mutual aching to leave. It's sort of wondering if his friends and his other family members will want to hear about his dead wife. Wife is sort of wondering if maybe there's like kind of something wrong with him or something like that, and if he's sort of fallen into a downward spiral because of this pretty tough loss he's had to deal with. And he also does kind of a similar thing with the track When I Take Out the Garbage at Night. It's sort of talking about how what started out as kind of like a normal sort of everyday sort of thing that he did around his home now has sort of turned into kind of him sort of getting all these memories sort of rushing back to him. Memories sort of rushing back to him, which are sort of created by simple things. Things including when he says stuff like, I'm not with you then exactly, I'm with the universe, and with the lightning and thunder coming in over the mountains. That's poeticism right there. And then sort of having to kind of live on once he's done with the job. And then there's the track Toothbrush / Trash, which is sort of a song where he's made yet another big realization 3 months and 1 day after she died, which was that these photographs that they have of her are slowly replacing the subtle, familiar memory of what it's like to know you're in the other room, to hear you singing on the stairs, of movement, a pine cone, your squeaking chair, the quiet untreasured in between times, the actual experience of you here. I can feel these memories escaping, colonized by photos, narrowed down, told. My mind erasing. The echo of you in the house dies down. Dies down. What a heart-wrencher right there. Sure, right there. And sort of talking about how he finally took out the upstairs bathroom garbage and sort of throwing it away, her dried out, bloody end-of-life tissues, her toothbrush and her trash. Trash. So, like, the song titles of these songs are sort of inspired by simple things that he sort of encounters that were, like, belongings of hers and stuff like that. That sort of create a symbol of how she's no longer around anymore. It's me. And then we have another track that's, just as track that's at similar length as Ravens, as it does clock in at over a 6 minute and 33-second runtime. The song Soria Moria, which this one is actually a song that was written 7 months before Genevieve died, but it was written sort of when she was just like diagnosed with the pancreatic cancer. And sort of going through some very morbid vignettes of her at the hospital and stuff like that. And stuff like that. And it is really beautiful how after this song called Toothbrush/Trash, where it seems that her familiar memories have sort of been erased, he sort of kind of time warps us back to like before his death to sort of reveal how this tragedy sort of came to be in the beginning. And sort of talking about how he kind of went through a phase of like anxiety and like kind of losing his mind before like he met his wife and stuff like that. It's definitely kind of a vignette similar to something maybe like this album actually is somewhat comparable to like Sufjan Stevens' previous record, Carrie and Lowell, a record which I loved from 2015. Definitely check that out. But the vignette on here also sort of sounds like something maybe like Elliott Smith or Conor Oberst could have written, because it has a similar kind of introspective kind of intensity to it. But then with the second verse, he sort of talks about the experience of how she got in the hospital and he's sort of taking care of her, including by doing stuff like bringing her food that she wanted and like returning at night to sleep in that cold hospital bed. And he went back to feel alone there. All past selves and future possibilities on hold. While I tore through the dark on the freeway, the old yearning burning in me. But then sort of tying into this whole vignette, sort of a revealing of a painting at the National Gallery in Oslo, which is a painting called Soria Moria, which features like a kid looking across a deep canyon of fog in a lit up inhuman castle or something. And I would say this is the song excuse me. And I would say this is pretty much the only song on the record that actually has kind of a verse-chorus structure, because it does have kind of a repeating chorus of a slow pulsing, red tower lights, cross the distance, refuge in the dust. And then the album closes with the track Crow, which is technically kind of the title track for the record, even though it just has the word crow in it. But definitely the perfect closer for the album, because not only is it like the most recent vignette on the record lyrically, but also it is... Oh, and I also forgot to mention, Soria Moria does have a really nice sort of jagged, kind of brutal, distorted electric guitar or bass or whatever in the background that really does sort of really contribute to kind of the intensity of the story of the song really well. Well, anyway, back to the song Crow. This one is pretty much the most recent vignette on the record, and he opens it up perfectly with the lines of, "Sweet kid, What is this world we're giving you? Smoldering and fascist with no mother. Are you dreaming without a crow? The line of smoldering and fascist with no mother, sort of talking not only about the death of this baby's mother, but also of how this vignette pretty much takes place right after the really shocking times of that shocking times, like times including the election had just happened and stuff like that. And sort of talks about how after breakfast they went back into the woods to see if we could see this, if they could see this past August forest fire zone on the hill above the lake. The sky was low and the wind cold. The trail was closed, and they sort of all of a sudden see this crow that sort of followed us the whole way back home. Kim is sort of talking about how he heard his daughter murmur in her sleep, crow, and he sort of asks, "Are you dreaming of a crow?" And there she was. Definitely definitely makes sense to make that the last few lines that he says on this record. So yeah, overall, I don't really have any complaints about this record. It's definitely, it's a very emotional record, and it definitely, hits you like a stake to the heart, especially if you've dealt with a similar thing that he has. If your loved one, or if a loved one in your life has passed away, this is definitely a record that is going to be a very emotional listening experience for you, but believe me, it's worth it, because it is one of the best albums of the year. Probably my indie folk record of the year right here, because it's just so well written, and even the production, even though it's not super crazy with extra instrumentation or production or anything like that. It's a very sort of homemade, sort of acoustic folk sort of sound. It definitely is very much produced really well too, and it really does capture and it really does a good job of sort of capturing how sort of real and sort of authentic this sort of loss and the making of this record was for him. So I'm definitely giving this album a strong 9 out of 10, because all the songs here are fantastic. There's not one clunker in the mix. Anyway, that's my review of the new Mount Eerie record, A Crow Looked at Me, and I'll see you for episode 192.